Okay, we are very happy to be here. We did this research with Felipe Gonzalez, is over there. We have been working a lot, especially for the database. It's very difficult to have data for Paraguay. The official data of the central bank is since 1994. And before that, we need to go to books like Mexico, books and memories of the central bank. So it's very challenging. Your comments are going to be very useful. I want to say thanks to Nicolini. His comments was very useful for us to finish our presentation. Okay. First, I'm going to give a brief overview of the Paraguayan economy. Only a brief overview to see the path of the main variables. And after that, we split the history in 4 periods that I'm going to explain later in terms of the budget constraint accounting. So in this presentation, we are going to see a lot of graph pictures. So we need your help to try to understand everything. Okay, here's the inflation of Paraguay since 1939 to 2015. In Paraguay, we have the same currency since 1954 with the whole zeros. The name of the currency is Guarani. We never changed that currency. We never had higher inflation than that. And in the first period, 32% on average, we don't have data. Only for inflation and some other variables. So it's very difficult to explain why we have that average of inflation. But for the rest, yeah, 39 to 55, that period. We don't have data for that period. Only inflation and a part of output that I'm going to present after. But if you read some memories that doesn't have data, they said that we have a big fiscal deficit, only that, to finance. The same histories in the whole period, in each of the periods. Investment in constructions, fiscal deficit, and the inflation is a little lower. It's the same history always, especially in that first period that we don't have data. Okay, and we present in the last conference the fiscal deficit for this period that have the 23% on average, and we didn't understand how was related with the fiscal deficit, and we tried to research in that area, and right now we know, and we are going to present, and the history is very clear right now for us. Okay, this is the real GDP per capita, the trended by a constant growth. Here we have the periods that we split, and we put some explanation about these periods. And this period is very, very important for growth. And I'm going to explain why we have this growth, and I'm going to explain why a very, very uncommon.
So when you did trending, what was the growth of the trend?
2%.
2%.
Is the average of the whole history. I have the average for each decade in the next. You can see and you can compare with another Latin American countries. But in this period, we have a very, very uncommon. In the history of Paraguay, I'm going to explain later. I have. It's not a main point of this research, but it's very important to understand what happened with the growth and with the revenue of the government. So I'm going to explain this. Okay, you can see this is maybe the more difficult in terms of stability for Paraguay that we are going to explain, and this is the most recent data that we have. Okay, the external public debt, we adjusted by the real exchange rate, and we have the external public debt. I have to say that almost all the public debt is with the IMF, the IDB, and the World Bank, almost everything. In this episode, I'm going to explain what happened here, and it's almost the same, with the difference that in this period we have a fixed exchange rate. In this one, from the 64, to 89. Okay, and here we have devaluations. I'm going to explain what happened, fiscal deficit. The central bank need to finance that fiscal deficit. We lose reserve. The same history. Okay. And the real exchange rate in the 89 and the 2002. Okay, here we have this is the graph from Bolivia's history and in the paper of the fiscal and monetary history. We put here only to compare the average growth with the other Latin American countries, and we have these two periods. In this period, Paraguay is in the top, and we are going to explain what happened here. And in this period, Paraguay has a very high average growth of GDP. We finished with an average of 2% in the whole history. That is the average that we use to detrend the real GDP output. Okay, here is the narrative of the period. We try to give a brief overview of what happened here. And if you remember, Paraguay had a problem of inflation in the period before that. So Stroessner, that was the president from the 54 to the 89, and his main problem was to contain the inflation, and he tried to do that with an stabilization plan with the IMF. So he tried to have a better economic growth and a nominal stability in that period. That was his main goal. In the other, this was the period of the Stroessner government, but he has a problem that it changed the scenario. He has the same strategy, but with a different scenario. Here we have external shocks, like the price of the commodity prices go down, and he has a lack of ability to borrow from the international markets. So he has some problems that he didn't face in the last period, and I'm going to explain what happened here. In this period, we have, it finished the Stroessner government, and we start a democratic transition with several fiscal and monetary policies. This is a very special period that the inflation goes down. We have a very low average of inflation, but we have some problems of fiscal deficits that we are going to explain in a minute. And the last period is from 2004. This period started with a standby agreement with the IMF. And this program was oriented to reduce tax evasion, to try to increase the revenues of the government, and to make some changes, like we have a fiscal rule, and we start with the inflation targeting regimen to try to have a more rule-based strategy for the monetary policy. Okay, so we follow the Quijo, Nicolique, and Sargent, the methodology that we have, with the only change that we put here, that I'm going to explain what is this in a second, with a very short or a very brief explanation, because it's not the main point of this research, but it's very important to understand the impact of this. And this is the only change that we did to the budget constraint. Okay. What we're trying to do here is to present the budget constraint for each of the periods and try to understand what happened with the variables in each of the periods. Here we start with the first period, 61 to 81. We have here that this is the residual, and we don't have good data for this, only for a period that is this one, but we think that that is the most important period that we need that data for explain what we are going to explain in a second. In this period, we have a different scenario that I'm going to show in a minute. And all these deficits of these public firms was financed by seigniorage, by the central bank.
So what you call in public enterprises deficit is estimated as a residual.
Yeah.
And which are the companies you have in mind?
We have a lot. We have a company, Aceros del Paraguay. We have a steel. We have a company of electricity, that is Itaipu, that I'm going to explain right now.
But you have Itaipu, you have it on a separate line. So you're not taking it, you're counting the ones for...
It's another one, it's Ande, is the other one. Itaipu is one of the electricity, we have another one. And we have some firms that invest a lot in construction and infrastructure.
Is it possible to get at least data for the 90s and the 2000s?
Here is not so important in terms of inflation. Here is very important.
At least to check whether the 0.7 you get as a residual looks anywhere close to whatever the number.
Here looks very, very close.
Also, you have the data for the
only for this period. No, yet. It's very difficult to have everything. It's very complicated to have this data. But this is the most important period in terms of deficit and inflation, because in this period, the central bank financed all these deficits.
Okay. And then you, but for that period, you have data on the deficits.
Yeah, it's very related. And here we have a legal reform, and the central bank is independent. We have the independence of the central bank. So the central bank can't give loans to these public firms, and only short-term loans to the central government. So we think that this is the most important period for that variable, and we have that. And it's very related with this deficit. Okay, here we have the inflation of that period and the primary deficit of the central government of that time. The inflation on average was 11%, especially due to the oil price shocks that we have in those periods. We have surplus at the finish of this period, and we think they are not very related, especially because the deficits...
Okay, so you have... Go back. So you're measuring the surpluses on the right. So essentially you said there were only deficits in 65 and 73.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. Only in this period. But the inflation is very low. They finance this deficit. The central government financed this deficit with debt. They increase a lot the debt of the country. This is going to be a problem for the next period.
So if you draw a line at 0, you're going to get at most a 1% deficit in 23, and at most 1% deficit in 65. So that's very small. And then you have these relatively large primary surpluses. So I would have guessed that the debt would go down, not up, over all the period.
Yeah, but they
So you're going to do the decomposition of the debt at some point with the accounting of the...
We're going to try, yeah. We need data for that, for this.
And then it might be more helpful here, rather than have the rate of inflation, actually the imputed seigniorage. Because sometimes, I mean, it depends on what you think the money demand is. Well, that's from a theoretical point of view. But even from an applied point of view, very often inflation goes down, the seigniorage goes up, because people are willing to hold higher real balances.
This is primary deficit.
Yes.
I bet you not the rate of inflation. Like if you drawn a seigniorage Laffer curve, you should do that. You should probably have all of the countries compute
that's
that.
right, exactly. It depends on what side of the Laffer curve
But
you're on.
in Argentina, I've done it. Way for rates up to 40%, it's still almost linear.
Yeah, for those...
Right, and I'm talking about the other side of the Laffer curve. Yeah. Yeah, coming down from
But still-
1,000% to 20% is really good.
But still, a measure of senior will give you a more comparable.
Then you can put it with the same
direction for
axis.
Yes.
Then you can have the same axis
Same
rather
axis,
than this two-sided y-axis.
Okay. Maybe we saw that this increase in the external debt was the main problem for the next period that we are going to explain in a second.
Now here you have the senior edge.
Yeah, here's the senior edge. Yeah.
Good.
And it was one of the main source for finance the deficit. And here we have the behavior of the GDP growth. I'm going to explain what happened here, why we growth so high in this period. The capital inflows that finance this current account deficit, and we increase a lot our international reserve. Almost all this is due to what we call Itaipu. This is not part of the research, but it's very important to understand what happened. It's a binational entity created in the 70s with Brazil. Basically, Brazil put all the money to create this hydroelectric dam and give the 50% of the funds to Paraguay.
It's Paraguayan.
So it's Paraguay, yes, the 50%. And all the money that Brazil invests to construct this dam is Itaipu pays when they sell the energy. So the central government never needs to have more taxes to pay that debt. For give an idea, they invest 10% of the GDP for 10 years. So that explains why Paraguay growth at this rate and this capital inflows in this period. And it maybe has two main consequences. First is the growth that we have, and the second is the money that the central government receives for the construction of that dam. First, it receives a financial compensation for give the energy to Brazil, because we didn't use the whole energy that we have. And the second, for the utilization of the natural resources for the river. The river is our river, so they pay money to Paraguay to use the river. And if you see the budget account, it's very important for the next periods, the revenues of the central government to finance the deficits. So that's why we include in the budget account. So in this period, we didn't find a clear relationship between the fiscal deficit and the inflation, but in the next period, this one, we have the same deficit in these public firms that is financed principally by seigniorage, and this is going to be a problem, and I'm going to...
So now what happens, when you go from the 80s to the 90s, essentially you are, we're having a primary deficit that we are accounting it. So before, for the 80s, we were thinking that these 320 were the public enterprises. But now it appears that when we go to the 90s, then you get, did you privatize some of these state companies in the 90s?
No.
Then
Only
it
one.
appears that now it's in the books.
Yes.
So before in the 80s, when you look at the federal and the central government, they're actually saying they have a surplus. Mm-hmm. But then it comes in the residual, the 320. Now you have the 3. You have actually the deficit during the 90s. You have it explicitly in the account. But then what you have is that now you have an Itaipu, so you don't need to resort to senior so much.
Yes, but this is a little tricky. When you see the graph, you're going to see you have a big deficit in the middle of this period, and in the other middle you have...
very different, okay.
Okay, you're going to see. Here we have the graph that we present in the last conference that we said that we think that the inflation is not related with the primary deficit. And this is the primary deficit of the central government. Here,
you mentioned that on the right.
yes.
So that's essentially you're saying that from 1985 onwards there was a surplus.
Yes, but if we add the public funds, we have this.
Oh, I see.
And the public funds has a lack of ability to borrow in international markets. So the central bank gives the money to these public firms to his investment in construction, infrastructure. And here we have the amount of money.
And this is for the decade in which you actually do have the data of the deficits.
Yes.
So this is not computed as an residual.
No. Yes, it is, but it's very related. We compare it, it's very related. I think the real data is bigger. We have a bigger deficit with the real data. Yes. And here we have a clear relationship. And here we have the amount of credits that the central bank give to the public firms to invest in construction and infrastructure. This is the amount of credits that the central bank give to the public firms. The central bank finance all the investments that they made.
What's the difference between M0 and the monetary base?
This have the, the deposits that the central bank, yes.
Okay, so M0 is only
Yes, cash.
okay.
Only cash. Okay. And it was very important to explain the inflation because we have in this period the higher inflation in the whole history that we have data.
And these are required reserves, so that's how they can get seniorage. They just tell banks you have to leave, 20% or, oh no, it's more like maybe half of your deposits. You have to leave them on reserves with us, and then we can just inflate away their value.
Yep.
Yeah. In this period, we have, I think here I'm going to present, we don't have the same capital inflows. We have almost the same current account deficit, and we lose a lot of reserve in that period. And that's why, because we have a fixed exchange rate, and the central bank give a lot of credits to that public firms that I show. And we have that first big devaluation of the exchange rate in this period. We have that inflation that we saw, the higher in the history.
Can you go back one? The one you had foreign debt. Where's foreign debt?
This one, the green one.
But that's adjusted. So that goes up until 87.
Yes.
But not much from
Not much.
forward. Then go back to the following one. So we're not really financing the government then.
What?
The government was not really borrowing too much abroad. So
No.
current account deficits were for the private sector.
Yes, primarily for the private sector. So here we find a clear relationship between the inflation and the deficit of the public firms that the central bank finance. And this reduction of the international reserve with the amount of credits that the central bank give to the public firms explain why the exchange rate appreciates so much in this period. The government started to devalue the exchange rate in this period. And in the 89, they put the floating exchange rate since 89. Yes. Here we lose about 44% of the international reserve.
Yeah, but you start losing them in 86. Go back to the previous one.
Yes.
The expansion in credit. The expansion in credit goes all the way up to 83.
Yes.
So it's 3 years later that you get the drop in reserves.
Is this?
But these are real.
Yeah.
These are real. These
Real.
are real. Okay. Yeah, so you cannot really compare these with the other ones.
Yes.
If you want, essentially the logic would be that starting in 86, you start giving credits in domestic currency to the private sector, and then you start losing reserves because you have a fixed exchange
Like a
rate.
Truman crisis.
Yeah.
Yes.
So maybe that would be useful to look at the nominal values of the credit expansion
Okay.
and compare those with the reserve losses.
Okay. 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 Here for this period, we did the same. Here, the difference is that we have the revenues from Itaipu. That is the main source to finance this primary deficit of the government. Here we have the legal reform of the central bank law that said that the central bank can't give loans to these public firms and only short-term loans to the central government. So in this period, almost everything is financed by the revenue of the central bank and external debt. I'm going to show the relationship between primary deficit and inflation. The average rate of inflation in this period is very low.
I thought you had surpluses in this period. I might be confused, but I thought when we saw the beginning.
This is the 93 to 2003.
So you have
Yes.
pretty high, okay. I was confused. I thought you had-
Okay. Okay. And here we have the second big devaluation, no, depreciation of the exchange rate.
And what happened with the debt?
The debt increase. It was one of the main sources to finance the deficit.
So if you go back to the deficit, inflation is low, but it's not, I mean, you get a little bit of seniority. Go to the table where we can see how much seniority you get during here. You get 1%, okay. Then go back to the plot. Here you're telling me that from 98, you had 3% deficit, and then you went to 4, and then 6, and then 5. So when if you accumulate those deficits, you get like 20% of GDP easily.
Yes.
But then when you go to the debt, you only increase 5% to GDP.
Yeah.
Unless GDP was growing a lot. Was GDP growing a lot during the period?
No.
No.
Then it's not clear how so do you have the accounting to see how, okay, let's go back then to the table. In the table you have the accounting. So how did you finance this? Oh, you have Itaipu.
Yes.
Ah.
Itaipu and the external debt.
Okay, then it would be good to measure. Yeah, but external debt went up only like 5% total. Look, it's just 0.34% a year
Yes.
in your same number. So maybe when you do this, it would be good to have an additional line that it would just subtract Itaipu.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
Because-
right. Why
because
is
that's
Itaipu not in the deficit?
Yeah, yeah. Why isn't Itaipu accounted as a regular income?
As revenue of the government. I mean, it is revenue.
Yes, it is. It's only to understand what happened.
No,
No,
but see,
we understand
this,
that.
I mean, and I don't want to get into this the differential between renewable, non-renewable natural resources, but this is what Felipe did when he took Pemex and consolidated it with
Yes, exactly.
with the government.
Okay.
So his deficits always had oil revenues in it.
Okay.
In the included, as opposed to Chile or Mexico, the revenues have fluctuated a lot with market prices. These objects have contract with Brazil,
It's a right,
so and they're very stable. You see.
Yes, Brazil put the price.
right. But that makes it better in
Yeah,
some
yeah,
sense.
it's more like a tax object.
Yeah.
It's like a
Yeah, that's what I kind of was led to think
like
of
a minority
this as
like
a
revenue,
revenue. Then
Yes.
we'll see. We have to go
Especially
through.
in this- in
But
this
it's true that. But Tim is making a good point, which is that you're not using. I mean, and this has to do with our living in the process. But
Right.
you're not using the same definition that Felipe, which makes
Right.
sense. You were in Paraguay working. He was in
No,
Mexico working.
but that's what I'm saying, Juan.
That's our job.
This session is pointing out to us jobs we have to do.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like come
we
up
might,
with
we
rules.
might should have that.
Yeah.
But who knows?
Yes.
Okay, whatever. But that's No, that's why I was, because then it could perfectly be the case that, because look, you're having it from 93 to 95. You're basically having zero deficits. So it might actually be the case that it did change a lot during the decade. When you go to the table, as you pointed out before, when I said, okay, this is like 0.2, but you told me no, but when you look at the whole period, it's going to be very different in two different periods. So maybe that 2.24 is just, it's not constant across the decade or something. But yeah, we have to take these into account.
Okay. Yeah, we have a difference between these two periods and these two because Itaipu, yes. But here, this deficit we finance with external debt too. Here you can see that the rest is Itaipu. And finally, in this period, we have almost the same. Almost everything is Itaipu. Is the usual thing. A little bit of seigniorage, a primary deficit, negative that is financed with this, and we come back to the public firms that right now is trying to increase the external debt to do the same thing that always, that is invest in construction and infrastructure, especially in the last part of this period.
Where do you measure inflation? No, go to plus. Where you measure inflation on the left?
Inflation is on the left.
I find the senior numbers a little bit too high, given the inflation rates that you have here. Like from 2007 onwards, you have an average inflation rate of 5%. So you're telling me that with 5% you're collecting 1.0, but you have growth here, right?
Yes.
Okay, do you have the growth numbers?
It's very volatile.
Okay, brutally.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's very volatile.
Yeah. Okay.
We have a lot of external shocks and
Oh, and that's also explaining why the debt to GDP. Okay.
yes.
Javier, can you show me the table, the results
course.
of the?
Here.
Because we were just talking with Gabriel. If you take Itaipu as a part of the primary deficit, as a part of the,
We have a surplus. Yes.
in that case, I think you would see a better relationship between inflation and the deficit.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
So that's what you're not seeing the.
Yes.
You show a graphic in showing the.
It is the cause of lower inflation. Yes. Yes.
In one graphic, I saw you had the relationship between the deficit and the deficit of the whole public sector and inflation. In that case, you see like a very nice. They show a very similar trend.
Yes.
In that case. So if you include Itaipu as a part of the deficit, I think in that case you'd see how
Okay.
they move together.
Okay. Great.
So in that case, that's why you see sometimes you have a very high deficit, but inflation is low.
We did it, but only when we don't put in the presentation. I think we put in Barcelona. We show that, but okay. But we didn't present like this. So I'm going to change. I'm going to present the two results. I think it's a good idea because we have like different things here because we don't have Itaipu here and we have Itaipu here, and it's very important to finance the deficit. So.
When is that Itaipu? When? What is the year?
Starting 1974.
No. When did they start producing and selling?
85.
85.
85. They collected money. The revenues started in 85.
85.
Yeah. Okay, here we have the output very volatile and the current account, the surplus, a little deficit. The external reserve will increase a lot in this period, but we don't have problems with inflation in this period. And I think that we need to input Itaipu for compare because otherwise we are going to have the problem that you mentioned before.
Can you see the debt?
The debt? Okay. This one. The green one. This is the domestic debt
Yeah, do you have any?
is very low. It's very low.
Okay, and it's been very low
Always.
always.
Yeah. Always. Here we have the second stabilization plan, and we start to pay all the debts that we increase in the period in this period. Here we increase
Show me the debt for the 93 to 2003 period.
this one. This increase.
Okay.
We increased this.
What is it that you had? Then you had
We increased this to pay this deficit. The government has problems to pay his debts in this period.
so there was a debt.
And we receive a credit from Taiwan. Usually, all the deficit was financed with external debt, and only in the period that we see, in this period, is that the public firms finance his investment with the central bank money. And in this period, we have, on average, 23% of inflation. In the rest, we have a very low inflation average. So that's it. Thanks.